Hey, good morning, good evening, good afternoon, folks, no matter where in the heck in the world you are. It's V the Gorilla Economist coming to you live on this edition of Rogue News TV. V is for Veles. And we have with us the Dark Raven of the Deep State himself, the man who needs no introduction. He lurks within the Rogue News Discord as well as the Telegram chats. He is the one and only Veles, and folks, you can find him over at RogueNews.com. And with that being said, Veles, good morning, buddy. How are you?
I'm good, my friend. An interesting week ahead of us.
Very interesting week ahead. Where do you want to start, man?
We're going to cover a lot of ground today. So for those of you out there, and some folks have suggested, not that I want to go taking a crowbar to our planned content for Rogue News. Some folks have suggested that I move to Mondays instead of Fridays. You and I talked about that one offline.
That's fine. Yeah, that works. You want to do Monday?
Well,
do Monday.
It is, and it is. And I've got to adjust my calendar a little bit, but we'll look into that. And just so I'm clear, so we will try to get Gus this week, or is he also offline this week?
I think he might be offline this week.
Okay, we're trying to get Gus back, folks. He's very busy down in Argentina. Yeah.
Yep.
But okay. Alrighty. So, U.S. military house cleaning. A few programs ago, I noted we had quite a few military officers who were demoted. And those things tend to occur. But it was notable at the time due to both the number of service branches involved and the number of officers affected or enlisted personnel affected, or enlisted officers, which are usually sergeants. In typical military fashion, the public statement provided in those situations was there was a loss of confidence in their ability to lead. In the last month or so, we've had 3 senior enlisted leaders who've been essentially fired. The most recent being the Command Sergeant Major Harold Jarrell of the senior enlisted leader for the 1st Information Operations Command, which follows the dismissal the week prior of the Army branch who oversees operations across all of Washington, D.C., that person being Command Sergeant Major Veronica Knapp, who was dismissed on August 8th. Knapp had previously served in Afghanistan, Guantanamo Bay, Cuba, and prior to her appointment in D.C. was based in Romania. Both of those enlisted officers had quite a few accommodations and prior, service sites where they'd been working. And then on July 16th, Command Sergeant Major Matthew Carlson was removed as the leader of the 173rd Airborne Brigade. In nearly all situations of these leaders, they were in their posts for less than a year or slightly over a year. The true backstory is unknown, but we continue to keep having these officers who are being dismissed. Plus, the other thing, too, not to go there, is we have had a number of naval officers dismissed, ship captains dismissed. So something to keep an eye on. Hot off the press this morning. That sounds familiar. In something reminiscent of Robert Maxwell, the father of Ghislaine, another high-profile British business person has disappeared on a boat and is most likely dead. Mike Lynch, who was once described as the Bill Gates of the UK, has disappeared along with others on a yacht off the coast of Sicily this morning.
Really?
Yes.
Yachts, sinking and planes falling out of the sky. That's normal, fellas. Totally, it happens.
Right. Why are you making a big deal out of this?
Yeah, let's make a big deal out of it.
Several people have been rescued off of the yacht, including the wife of Mr. Lynch. 7 people are still missing, with Lynch among them. Lynch was at the center of a high-profile legal case in San Francisco for the last few years. 2.5 months ago, the case concluded where he was acquitted. The reason for all of that drama was he had sold a company back in 2011 for $11 billion to HP. Thanks, V. He'd sold a company for $11 billion to HP, Hewlett-Packard. In 2012, HP wrote the company down by $2 billion to $8 billion and accused Lynch of serious accounting issues and other forms of malfeasance. He was indicted in 2018 by a grand jury, and on June 6th of this year, he wasn't acquitted. He was found not guilty. I'm fascinated to find what else will come out about this guy. I know the amazing Polly is taking a break right now, but I sure would love to see one of her PowerPoints on this topic. For those of you who might be a little fuzzy, Ghislaine Maxwell's father, Robert Maxwell, who was a use air quotes, was a media tycoon. I'm not sure we still use the word tycoon anymore. In the UK, where basically, like a lot of media outlets, he acquired a lot of blackmail on people, and Maxwell was accused of being an intelligence asset for probably no less than 3 countries. He disappeared on a boat. It kind of reminds me of the old joke about if somebody dies in a car, in the 1970s and 1980s, there was a joke in certain circles that used to say, if somebody dies in a car accident in the continental United States, it probably was the FBI or the CIA. If somebody dies of a heart attack, it's usually the Russians. So probably the British. Well, plus, not to go down a rabbit hole, but the famous Lord Mountbatten.
Yes.
The IRA blew.
Charles's father.
No, his mentor.
His mentor. Okay.
Yes, but Mountbatten, who boy, that's a little bit of history for any of you who might have some time to look into that. And ironically, was even covered in the TV show The Crown, along with others. Mountbatten at one point tried to overthrow the British government in the 1950s because the public had too much of a say in what was going on in Britain. But yes, Mountbatten was a mentor and advisor to Prince Charles. And he was blown up by the IRA on a yacht of his. But as the old saying goes, there's still been a lot of eyebrows raised over the years about was that really what happened, and was it really the IRA? Was he getting out of hand? So I'm terribly sorry, but your coupon has expired. This is an old game played for a long time in politics. The House of Representatives, a number of their committees, have issued a 291-page report this morning accusing Joe Biden of impeachable conduct. One of the accusations being Joe Biden and the Biden family monetized the office of the White House. I like that one. There's a long list of factual data found during these investigations, but he can't be impeached because the clock has run out, similar to the expiration of allowable time to bring charges for a variety of things the last few years, like election interference and blaming Russia campaigns in 2016, 2017. This is an old trick by lawyers where someone acknowledges wrongdoing after the statute of limitations has expired. However, I will say this, though. Those investigations produced a ton of data about the Biden family, and for those of you who own Ryan Dawson's Biden crime map, I own one, that's a lot of people. Pity many of them live in Delaware, where they own the Attorney General of that state. However, if some of those crimes crossed state lines, that sure would open a ton of litigation. Then again, perhaps the whole point of this was to put the Biden family on notice, to keep their heads down and stay out of Washington, D.C. from this point further. Or else all the stuff in that report becomes indictments. Hard to say. Have we not met before? For those of you trying to determine whether it is deja vu or reality, I have something for you. I've covered on some programs the whole crisis actor topic, how they're hired, where they're actually recruited, how it's firewalled, and in the case of that, usually 2 law firms involved so that you have layers of attorney-client privilege, and the list goes on. Praise be to the Lord above, I found the Amazing Polly program from 5 years ago where she delved deeply into this topic, including pairs of brothers and sisters who kept popping up at the Las Vegas shooting to make statements about what they saw, and who were also at the Thousand Oaks, California shooting that same year. Boy, what bad luck for the ready-made media person Nicholas Champion, who is the person I'm talking about. Then we have Joey Obeid, who witnessed the shooting at the University of North Carolina, Charlotte, and a shooting at a bar at the University of Dayton back in 2019. In the case of the bar in Dayton, what kept that from getting out of control was truly a miracle. 2 off-duty police officers who still had their firearms on them ran when they heard the shooting and took out the shooter. The shooter of that particular event was a guy named Connor Betts. If those off-duty officers hadn't been there, and given the amount of armament the guy had on him, the loss of life would have been much larger. Oh, and the shooter's family said the shooter had been on psychological medication and he'd been hearing voices, and he killed his own brother in the attack. Beyond the witnesses I named, immensely bad luck. What else is true of both guys? Well, both Nicholas Champion and Joey Obeid, they both have sisters who are reporters in local news organizations. In the case of Nicholas Champion, the guy at Las Vegas and Thousand Oaks, he also has a brother or cousin named Matthew Champion, who is the deputy world news editor for BuzzFeed News. You can't make this up. For those of you who want to see Polly's program on that topic and many elements connected to it, please see the Veles page on Discord from yesterday. You can also go to the BitChute, what's we're looking for, streaming website, and then find the page for Amazing Polly, and then search for her program titled Psy, P-S-Y, PsyOps Goes Mainstream from 5 years ago. It also has the hashtags PsyOps, False Flag, and Crisis Actors. She does her usual very good job with a number of PowerPoints and PowerPoint pages and so on that tie together the usual intelligence agencies in the Levant, the British, media companies who operate under various mysterious circumstances, who always seem to have people working for them who were shocked, I tell you, shocked that this is the third or fourth shooting that they have just suddenly found themselves at. The Democratic National Convention this week, to be honest, I will not be watching it, and I didn't watch the RNC either. However, I will be monitoring, and not for a single word said at the thing. I'll be observing tradecraft used by the protesters and various groups who plan to be there. For those of you not monitoring all of the alternative activist pages, and you probably shouldn't do that either, they've been busy little bees the last few months since many of them left campus. I'm sure many of you have seen in the social media photos of large piles of bricks dropped off at protester rallying locations this weekend, and the thing hasn't even really started yet. There are rumors as well. Many Democrat Party attendees are under assumed names at hotels and restaurant reservations, among other things. If you were a global elite and wanted to learn things, my recommendation would be I would infiltrate the good drug dealers and the high-end sex workers, no different than Davos or Aspen meetings. That, and pay off some bartenders with large bills to get the 411 and what was said at the bar. Because, folks, that's how you gain real valuable intel. Lastly, I have a personal reason for monitoring these goings-on. It'll be a clear indicator of what my university clients should be anticipating. I'm also waiting to see if Hillary Clinton is going to ride in with her flag of the London Corporation and try and undo Davos's candidate picks this week. One other item about all of this. Astrologically, today, Monday, is a blue moon. So we'll add some astrological seasoning to what's going on this week. Optics advancements. It was probably 10 or more years ago when both the defense press and the conference circuit I used to attend in those days in the defense sector discussed an amazing new technology. Targeting scopes for military rifles made missing your target nearly impossible. These targeting scopes had small computer processors in them and similar, and could adjust depending on how expensive they were, for everything from the movement of the shooter with the rifle to wind and other things that will affect the bullet as it's fired. These began only by being used on things like those rifles who fire the small grenades, where you can literally select or switch the thing to explode on contact, explode in a room, explode after it goes through two walls, explode above a target, you choose. They installed the new scopes on those types of higher value rifles or weapons first. Over the years, technology's gotten even better, to the point you can buy the things if you know a vendor for your hunting rifle. One such vendor, for those of you who might like one, is https://www.smart-shooter.com. Parallel this with my own experiences watching the Air Force during those years begin testing how to refuel drones while they're in flight, not on the ground. By the way, there's a lot of flight dynamics and other things that go on when you're trying to refuel a drone, because a drone doesn't have the stability in the air that an aircraft would with a pilot in it. And when I say refueling drones, what I'm also talking about is drones refueling other drones. Total Skynet. Well, guess what? You betcha. Those targeting scopes who can adjust for vibration and other issues still hit the target. They're installing them on drones. By the way, that's everyone in the world is installing them on drones. Result is, whether the firing platform, shall we say, is a person or a drone, you now have soldiers and drones with as much firing accuracy as an M1 tank, or a much larger platform. Much like IT products or farm equipment where the term modular is often used, the same is true with military gear. You can now buy drones and related UAV or RPV, depending on which of those terms you prefer, type platforms from Iran to Turkey to South Korea, and then install the higher-end targeting scopes on them. A little software integration, your toys are now ready to light up the neighbors on the border. Reminds me of what occurred with tanks and other ground attack vehicles back in the 1990s. Several countries had moderately okay Soviet or Russian gear, or gear from Brazil or anyone else in the mid-market of arms dealers. Then they loaded up their equipment with French optics and targeting systems or systems from other sellers. Now suddenly that old Soviet equipment is far more potent on the battlefield. Occasionally, if you peeled off the French weapons maker's sticker on the stuff, you'd find the word Siemens or Bosch underneath, with an exasperated official from Germany claiming, "How the hell did that get here? We always follow embargoes." Reminds me of my other favorite embargo breaker no one ever thinks of when it comes to this stuff: Norway and Sweden. Oh, yes, folks. For all the Nobel Peace Prize crap, those guys sell electronics to the nastiest regimes on the planet. Your takeaway is this is a major force multiplier in military gear. Even old equipment will still kill you if you can improve the accuracy. Likewise, just because you make a cheaper drone, it doesn't have all the bells and whistles of American or British gear, doesn't mean you cannot play. Just outsource the targeting, spray the thing down with some of the special black or gray paint to absorb energy like radar, and you can play with the big kids. Everyone out there is going to be jumping into this after what's been observed from the lessons in Ukraine. Oh, and one other key: weapons development with drones and missiles. As noted by many, the level of electronic interference has proven quite potent on the battlefield, knocking out everything from cruise missiles to smaller missiles to drones. So folks have gone back to basics. Many of the weapon systems in the field, they're either now reinstalling or just building them from the ground up with the old wire-guided munitions for battlefield situations where they know electronic weapons against you are very effective. Much of the anti-tank and related missile ordnance in the 1970s and 1980s was wire-guided, meaning that you fired the munition or the missile, and there was a little spool with wire on it, and you literally guided the thing where it was going. Then there was the switch to wireless or onboard systems on the missile. Now the latter has become highly compromised thanks to lessons learned in Ukraine, and back to basics we go. This is a bit ironic to me because the first folks who developed a wire-guided munition were the Germans around 1940. The first product used by Nazi Germany in the wire-guided realm was a guided bomb called a Fritz X, who was dropped from small bombers, usually against British shipping. They proved quite effective, and they will be again. Problem, reaction, solution, and drones. The following's from Brendan O'Connell. Yes, I know it's Brendan. That said, he went into a little narrative about a problem, reaction, solution I thought was interesting, especially because he had a drone angle. Kids have come into possession of firearms, and so the system said we need laws to further restrict the ability to even sell firearms. Drugs were dealt into society at scale. Then they demanded state and federal legislation to militarize law enforcement, seize property, and sell it without the accused even having gone to court first, plus the appointment of drug czars. Weapons were supplied to gangs and terrorists, and then they said we needed the Patriot Act. Drone technology is expanded by many factors and released for use in society, and then legislation limits its use because of concerns about privacy and more. Then the only ones with effective drones are federal agencies. Oh, here's one. How long till the next attempted or successful assassination of someone is via drone instead of a deranged shooter on an angled roof whose body is suddenly cremated? The last reference was for those of you who caught the news on Friday that the Trump shooter's body was cremated before it could be examined in detail. Imagine the reaction if someone configures a drone who kills a high-profile person. Can you imagine the
Hold
level
on.
of...
Did you just say the Trump shooter's body was cremated?
Yes. Yes,
We
that
have
came out.
another JFK missing brain situation here.
Well, sorry to be that guy. I say this tongue in cheek. We know where JFK's brain is. Some of you know this, some of you may not. Bobby Kennedy, shortly after his brother was buried at Arlington, and a few sound bites on that topic. The only grave at Arlington Cemetery that is not owned by the Park Service and the Veterans Affairs Agency is John F. Kennedy's grave. It's owned by the Kennedy family. So you can't touch anything at that grave where Bobby and John are buried unless you go through the Kennedy family. There was a security perimeter set up a week or a few days after John F. Kennedy was buried there, after the assassination. And a security perimeter was set up by, I forget if it was the Secret Service or it was a military detachment, but loosely said, almost like straight out of Rome, people that were loyal to the Kennedy family. And Bobby had the grave reopened, and next to the casket, he buried a metal sealed container that has JFK's brain in it, or brain material in it, along with a number of records for safekeeping. And then, of course, several years later, Bobby Kennedy was killed. The belief in certain circles from a number of people, including everyone from G. Gordon Liddy, ironically, to a number of others, is that the safest place on earth that the Kennedy family and Bobby could put key evidence of the assassination was with JFK, because it's buried in a place that only the Kennedy family can get to it. And as I've covered on some other programs, what's the deal about the former president's brain or brain matter, and why that Canadian researcher who wrote the book, The Inheritance, found himself in a U.S. federal prison and was dragged across the Canadian border to be imprisoned in the United States. It comes down to mercury, liquid mercury, because really good assassins always tip their bullets with mercury to make sure that the target is killed. Even if they're only wounded, the mercury gets into the bloodstream. It'll kill you within minutes. So the feeling was that if there was liquid mercury on JFK's person, that would be a further indicator that this was not a lone gunman, that this was people who really knew what they were doing. It has to be a state actor, etc. So moving to the Donald, it's a little fuzzy, but the net of it is this. The body of the shooter was examined by the coroner, I believe. Then the FBI stepped in and ordered them to turn the body over to the family. The family had it cremated. Last week this came out, that this is what happened. And it's several things. One, this obviously prevents any further examination of the body and possible evidence that could be gleaned from that. But the second thing is that the FBI went above their authority and told the family, go ahead and have the body cremated or whatever they're going to do with it. So, yeah, that's what happened to the shooter's body. So to my narrative about drones killing people, can you imagine the level of crackdown we would find if suddenly high-profile officials were to get killed by a drone? Because I'm telling you right now, folks, that's going to happen. It will happen. And I saw how scared government officials were, and I'm dead serious. When I was working in Washington, D.C. in 2008, 2009, and the economy went into the can, and I brought this up on other shows, I remember sitting at the bar at the old Ebbett Grill, or the bar over at the hotel across the street from the White House. God almighty, I always forget. It's the bar where the famous term lobbyist came into play, and some of the other places in D.C. And I would bump into congressional representatives, staff, or similar. And I heard the same story over and over again back in 08 and 09 when the economy hit the wall, which was that, especially with Congress people, but an occasional senator or two, they would not go back to their home districts. They physically would not leave Washington. And the reason was because their constituents were so jacked up, and understandably so, that there were so many threats, legitimate threats, that even the Secret Service told these elected U.S. officials during those years, we can't keep you alive. Your butt should probably stay in D.C. and it'll be best for everybody.
Wow.
So if now you have the ability to take out a high-profile person, and for the National Security Agency who's listening to today's broadcast, I would just like to point out, I'm speaking purely theoretical, boys. You know that I'm speaking purely theoretically. But anyway, can you imagine the panic in elected officials if now, on top of everything else, they got to worry about drones? I get visions of the scene from Goodfellas where the drugged-up mafia guy is looking out the window, Ray Liotta. He's looking out his window, paranoid about every helicopter in the air as a Fed. Please stand 6 feet apart. Several things have been happening on a topic I really don't want to discuss, and this is probably the harder hitting piece of today's show, folks. I've mumbled the following on a few prior shows about my aversion to dealing with a lockdown on par with COOF again. And we're far better prepared this time. And we truly are. At a minimum, we have each other on today's program and other programs like ours here at Rogue. Folks have a much better understanding of the courts, legal procedure, what legal precedents to use in their favor, and on and on and on. I'm not an attorney. I'm not dispensing legal advice, nor are we here at Rogue. Simply noting from the public domain, these things would be like Rule FDA 320 regarding forced use of inoculations, your constitutional rights regarding yourself or your kids who are personal chattel. I know that always upsets people, but it's like it's the law, folks. And any kind of photograph or image of you used in confirmation of things, who I'll delve into a little later on. The latter item about the use of your image can get a little tricky, so do your research. I'll delve into why the likeness thing matters a little later. So what was rumor in the alternative space is becoming, I wouldn't say necessarily more likely, but more possible. Key word here, folks, is one of degree. The rumor being some illness was going to be used before the end of the year to justify some kind of lockdown or reaction. In current time, that being monkeypox, are now relabeled as the new and improved Mpox. Anything along these lines for me is on par with aliens on the White House lawn. Though in the case of the latter, I'm still hopeful. When aliens do land on the White House lawn, I'm not sure if I'll laugh, cry, both, popcorn, or just drink. We'll see. In all seriousness, though, our threat level has definitely gone up a notch. So let me break this down into what we know from sources, what we know factually, and what we need to monitor. So what do we know from sources in the alternative community who are not on the intelligence or private equity payroll? First, Mike Moore has laughingly pointed out a couple of times words to the effect of, yep, it sure looks like they're going to run monkeypox on several of his programs. Second, Derek Burrows on his program, Conscious Resistance, 3 weeks ago, stated the UN will declare some kind of emergency around September. This was based on conversations he heard within his network preceding a UN event this September called the UN Summit of the Future. It's also worth noting Derek covers topics a lot of folks do not, or not as many people do, things like the effects of 5G technology, the degree to which telecom executives have been bought off, compromised government officials in the state of Texas, natural farming, and a number of other topics. Plus, Derek Rose is also a big fan of micro communities of people working together, out of the light of the system. But I don't ever recall Derek Rose going full out and making a statement who was this blunt about the future. Third, for those of you who are familiar, there's a podcaster named LTC Stephen Murray, where LTC stands for Lieutenant Colonel, or Retired Lieutenant Colonel Stephen Murray. He had a program earlier last week who was posted to Discord by several folks where he and his roundtable said they will indeed use Mpox as they go forward. They then discussed ways to harden yourself at a cyber and personal level to reduce your visibility to government or corporations, similar to what we've done here on Rogue with John Singleton's work, as well as some prior programs that V and I have both done. Fourth, we have commentators on YouTube, of all places, floating this topic. Given the fact YouTube can shut down anyone's content in a second is very telling. It's either allowed disinformation or they don't care if it's said in the public domain anymore. This included a woman doctor who they kicked off 2 years ago from YouTube for content about the COOF and then reinstated her program a few weeks ago. What do we know factually? First, big box stores and restaurant chains have been closing with great enthusiasm the last 30 days and beyond. The official narrative is the economy, we need interest rates to be lowered, consumers are not spending, etc. However, if you had a repeat of 2020, those retailers will be hard hit. Therefore, potentially better to shut them down now and take the financial loss rather than later. Equally, it could be a financial move solely because of where they're taking the economy. So it could be either or as to why all those stores and restaurants are closing. Second, noticed this when I was in Europe and thought it was just Europe until I got back to the United States, especially the last 2 months. The degree of websites asking you how much they can monitor you while they're on their page has skyrocketed. Even if I'm using a VPN, nearly all websites are posting a smaller window asking if they can cookie you to death, or do you want the lighter option? My favorite is oftentimes with many of these websites, they'll let you go in there manually and turn everything off if you want to make that commitment in your time. For most people, that's rather time consuming, so I anticipate they think you'll just click the button and say, yeah, go ahead and monitor me. Like I said, this activity exploded in frequency mid to late July of this year. both when I was in Europe and here in the United States using different internet service providers. That seemed odd at first, but if there's truth to this story, then knowing what stories people are viewing and or what they're posting would be critical for Big Brother. Third, you have to search for it, but about 15 major music groups have all canceled their planned concert dates within the last 2 weeks. In fact, just this morning, several Rogue listeners were posting on Discord that we have a whole new batch of music artists who've canceled any of their performances for the rest of the year. Now, in some cases, as in the case of Steven Tyler of Aerosmith, I mean, between his age and his vocal cords, I wouldn't be surprised he's got to cancel, dates. But several of the other folks, it does raise an eyebrow. I've personally checked several of the groups that have said they're canceling dates, and they have indeed done so, with a wide variety of reasons being given. This is notable because the same thing occurred just prior to 2020 or early 2020. Fourth, the UN and World Health Organizations have both made statements recently about Mpox. There are rumblings of both organizations wanting a quarantine of African states. Fifth, Sweden has stated they have a confirmed case of the illness or cases of the illness in their country. No doubt we will start hearing other European countries claiming the same thing in the days or weeks ahead. Sixth, recall what I said about people I personally know reporting what they saw at the Dublin airport in late July. People being disinfected along with their luggage on the tarmac in Dublin before being boarded on planes flying in the United States. At the time, the description I was provided was it appears those folks had mumps. Given the seriousness of disinfecting them on the ground, and it was obviously not a mild cold, and that is concerning. Seventh, even for the Prime Minister of Canada, it was a stunning move by Trudeau last week. He told Canadians a major outbreak of some kind will occur before the end of the year, and then stated, and I'm paraphrasing, quote, even though we don't know what it is yet, unquote. And he said it'll be worse than COVID. To paraphrase the famous Bart Simpson meme, what an odd thing to say. What do we need to monitor? First, websites like the ones who monitor elected officials' stock trades. And are they making suspicious trades or trades that catch our attention? For those of you playing the home game, that would be websites such as https://www.capitaltrades.com/politicians. Are politicians making similar stock trades to the ones they made prior to the coup, like medical care items, unloading stocks who would be hurt under those circumstances, etc.? Second, are delivery service firms like Amazon buying more delivery trucks again, same as they did in 2019? Are they hiring more personnel? Maybe it's holiday related, maybe not, or anything else who enhances their ability to drop off a package. Third, are more high-profile entertainers canceling shows? Well, we already have an answer to that one from this morning. Fourth, do we have other activity who would be indicative of this kind of thing going forward? What can we do? First, review your prep supplies at home and double-check expiration dates on anything that may have an expiration date. Second, start using your VPN software all the time rather than periodically. In my case, I've returned to always using VPN on my PC, not just when I perform research. The one on my phone is never off. Third, double-check websites and similar for you to be able to purchase home or personal items you need online from more than just Amazon. From prior programs, you have institutional providers and health food providers who do ship. In the case of institutional providers, those are the folks who sell in bulk to schools, hospitals, prisons, etc. Fourth, and as always, keep your head. Don't react to things you may see in the news. At the same time, raise your awareness a bit on this one. My gut says Commonwealth countries will go far more draconian than the U.S. and other countries, but who knows? What am I doing? Well, I've reached out to two folks in two specific areas that relate to this topic. One was a contact who supports the back end for more of your high-end theater productions nationally rather than concerts, because theater productions are a completely different animal than music concerts. And I'm talking about classical musical concerts or plays or opera events where you need at least a sport coat to attend. I'm checking with them to see if they have unusual cancellation activity like what we've seen in the concert space. My other contact works in the food retail sector to check on rumors about installation of face scanning units for grocery store checkouts. My grocery store contact told me one of the larger chains out there did investigate such a technology a couple of years ago, but they canceled the project. The reasons were the costs associated with it, inclusive of a massive amount of storage needed for all the images, plus legal concerns about using people's images even if it was only internally. From LTC Murray, who you can find on Rumble, he ID'd a small grocery chain he said was either piloting such a technology going forward or a full deployment. The grocery store industry people will tell you it's to ID certain demographics and further refine their coupon programs and advertising. The alternative space folks will tell you the reason why this is being done is to cross-check when your transaction confirms that you have all of your shots before they let you go forward and purchase your groceries. Yes, you heard me correctly. You would hypothetically not be able to purchase food if the face scan says you're out of compliance. If that narrative sounds familiar, it should. There are some grocery stores in the United Kingdom who experimented with this around the time of the coup. None of my recommendations are a sure thing as far as preparedness or reducing your internet footprint. That's up to each of you and how you want to do it. V, while we're on this topic, this might be a good time to perhaps John Singleton review some of his approaches that I know he's covered on other shows.
Yeah.
Also, this goes to V has spoken of this at length. I've spoken of this at length, which is, and it's it's a harder step than buying off the shelf, but how to have somebody build a cell phone or a PC that's better at helping you stay off the grid or lowering your footprint. Again, it's like when people tell me, "Well, Volvo's really safe." It's like, yeah, and going over a cliff at what do you call it? The Hoover Dam, you're probably still not going to make it. It's like you're safer, and so it's a function of degree. How, what kind of steps do you want to take? And as I've mentioned before, you've got local IT or computer stores in your area run by, somebody who's retired or whatever and used to work in the industry who can build you a PC. This is not Best Buy or big box retailer. But you can go to folks who, I got one guy down the road from where I live right now. I occasionally take him old laptops of mine after I remove the hard drive. And, he pays me $50 to $100 because it's a good laptop in good condition, usually has a large screen, and he just rebuilds it for other people. So even if you're a little scared of Linux or whatever, what you can do is go to some of these vendors and ask them, I need you to build it, and I need you to sit me down and explain how to, use this thing. So it comes down to the degree to which you feel the need to reduce or eliminate your footprint, because whether it is this MPOX topic, folks, or whether it's other things, including even the entire overhaul of our global economic system, it's not going to go away. So it comes down to what degree do you want to reduce your footprint or improve the technologies you use or what have you. And of course, it's important to note, am I saying we need to have a meeting in Vienna, to use a very serious reference I once gave on a prior program? No, not yet, at least. I'm simply doing my normal overdone explanation as to why the DEFCON number just dropped a digit on this topic. Several of the items I've mentioned may in fact tie to economic problems who will most likely hit us in 2025. It could be both, could be neither. We just have to see. But the activity the last two weeks was notable enough. I felt the need to say something about it. Hidden religion. On a couple of programs, I've delved into this idea about the world's elites following a form of religion or sacred belief system they don't share with the rest of us. I'm not alone in that, as there are several other folks out there who study that very topic and in depth. I had two historical items I felt were worth sharing. First, Nancy Reagan, always the butt of jokes in the media, both during Reagan's presidency in the 1980s and following, she had to contend with a disclosure about astrologers visiting the White House. The backstory being Nancy had a couple of key astrologers she used to advise President Reagan on his calendar. I don't think that was the whole story, and I believe there was way more going on with that than what was known or understood in that area. According to the narrative, fellow Californian and entertainer Merv Griffin contacted Nancy after her husband was nearly assassinated. According to the narrative, Griffin told Nancy an astrologer he used warned of a dangerous period for Ronald Reagan around the time he was shot. The storyline says Nancy, always fearful for her husband's safety, enlisted the astrologer Joan Quigley and others to advise Reagan on his schedule and planning. Based on the levels of disclosures we've had the last few years about the world's elites, I think something far more critical was taking place. I believe Nancy or Ron or both were aware of far more than is publicly known about how the world's elites plan their various moves, specifically based on astrology, among other factors. We know, for instance, everything from JFKs assassination to the death of Princess Diana to 9/11, among other events, were timed due to a variety of significant astrological factors. A little research should establish whether the date and location of Reagan's attempted assassination fall in line with those models. Even if they do not, we know factually of John Hinckley's family and his father's connections to the intelligence community and MK Ultra-like programs specifically. My belief has been growing for some time that Reagan, beyond what they already knew, accelerated his effort in his presidency in astrological study to anticipate the moves not of Soviet leaders or similar, but the very apex elites we discuss only now. If you tried to explain the kinds of topics we cover on Rogue with the public in the 1980s, they would have thought you blew a piston in the engine talking about apex elites and similar using astrology. So it's no wonder the Reagans kept the stuff behind the scenes. I also believe this is why it was exposed during those years for that very reason, to lend credence to the idea Reagan may have been a great communicator, but he had a screw loose in a few areas and needed to get his wife under control. The irony being the very things they were trying to study and understand are in fact true and deadly serious. In the end, it was an effort to discredit not only a U.S. president, but anyone who believed in such, say it with me, crazy stories. Then let us turn back the clock and recall the events of the 1930s in Germany, specifically topics who've even received some attention in college history textbooks. This would be various occult practices and beliefs of senior Nazi leaders, including the famous Thule Society. Yet another of the many examples, like the Reagan White House, of ridicule and mockery of anyone fiddling around with ancient belief systems they feel will bring them power. Spear of the Roman soldier Longinus be damned. Small aside, before I used the name Veles as part of the Rogue News team in other circles, I was known by two other pseudonyms. One of them was Longinus, and the other was Acheron, for those of you who know your Greek mythology. Returning to this narrative, a lot of time has been spent by historians and others to discredit the crazy occult beliefs of Nazi leaders and how the Thule Society, among others in those years. Nor is my goal to give those beliefs credit, per se. However, I feel the efforts to discredit them or ridicule them over the years as part of an ongoing campaign to discredit anyone from finding how close some of those pagan or ancient beliefs the Nazis were meddling in were actually quite close to the beliefs of the elites over many centuries. Again, also let me say that I'm not endorsing in any way, shape, or form that the Nazis had it right. I'm simply saying that certain Nazi leaders stumbled upon, knew, or were told of how some of the world's apex elites operate, and they were simply trying to follow their own path. Elites and lessons from Game of Thrones. Tom Luongo has a worldview I've shared on a couple of programs based on game theory involving multiple players rather than just two. As I said on a prior program, things get dicey when you have more than two players in a game. It also creates the dynamic you cannot hold grudges beyond a certain point, because you'll find yourself outmaneuvered if you're unwilling to work with someone later who you were at war with previously. Like the line from The Godfather, "This isn't personal, Sonny, it's just business." As a result, this is why Tom is fond of TV programs like Babylon 5 and Game of Thrones. In the case of Babylon 5, and of course admitting my own love of that program, you also have the added dynamic of apex elites within the context of other elites, and then the little people caught up in the mix. Amusingly, in the case of B5, the apex elites in that program are literally billions of years old versus the next class of elites who maybe have a few hundred years or 1,000 years of high technology under their belt. Depending on the topics I've covered, you could make the argument we're living in that reality in contemporary time. I've recently begun rewatching Game of Thrones from season 1 to the end. I have to admit, this is a lot like reading the Bible from page 1 to the last page. It's 8 years of arduous programming. I never saw the series linearly, so I felt given global conditions I better redo the whole thing from start to finish. So other than the value of the multiplayer game via the series, why am I bringing it up? 5 important points to consider. First, there is much realistic brutality by all characters against one another in the TV series, and it's easy to see how things can get out of control. Blood cries out for blood. That's why Patrick Ryan's input about the need for a natural or imposed balance is so necessary lest the world find itself in a world war. Equally, his warning about why both blackmail and the shelf life of blackmail is equally critical to keep things in balance, a fact played out many times in the series. Second, Game of Thrones clearly demonstrates a topic I've raised often, who is assassination. Good assassination can save you a whole war if it's done properly. We need only look at the events of the last year, much less the last 5, to see that dynamic in play. Third, the sheer complexity of the plots involved in the entire 8-year story arc are quite literally an exact duplicate of the last 500 years of modern history, if not longer. Yet, ironically, real history is even more complicated than the series. It's why, in my opinion, and I've said it before, the best laid plans of the world's elites tend to blow up in their faces. There's always someone plotting their own conspiracy out there with their own designs intending to achieve their aims, not yours. Oh, a lot of people are going to die in the process, and there'll be great pain economically, socially, and politically, but in the end, the big plans often fail. Fourth, any of the long-term players of the quote-unquote game, the politics and intrigues of the Games of Thrones storyline, all end up with brutal deaths or reduced to practically nothing by the end. My top characters on that point being Varys, Littlefinger, and Tyrion Lannister, among others. Fifth and last brings us to the topic of religion. More specifically, the show has some rather weird religious practices and beliefs. Now, based on some of my other programs, consider the following. Beyond the world's known religions from Asia to North America to Europe to Africa, what if the world's elites do not have a single unifying religion or belief system of their own, but instead, many? Now, if they have many hidden faiths among themselves, now, my friends, we have an explanation for something who's eluded researchers for years on this topic. Namely, why was one set of practices or beliefs about astrology and numbers and ancient symbols followed on one major world event like the Olympics, but not another? It's not that our analysis was wrong on those practices because we missed predicting the second event. It is because the fact that we are dealing with more than one hidden sacred belief system by the world's elites. A reality who doesn't need to address several challenges in trying to get our heads around the world we live in. My thanks to the creators of Game of Thrones for the clarity. From a prayer to Veles in ancient Slavic, came across a translation of a prayer to Veles I wanted to share. Equally, keep in mind many of the world's ancient beliefs are a duality or balance among forces who at first glance appear to be in conflict. Case in point, conflict between the Slavic deities Perun and Veles. Their conflict was occasional, and the rest of the time they were in balance. And of course they were in balance as the ancient Slavic people gave their own names to what in reality was Enki and Enlil, with Veles taking the identity of Enki from Sumerian. If you listen to the ancient words I'm about to read, this could just as easily have been written in contemporary time as the ancient. So this is the prayer to Veles. Ancient times once, according to the plan of the great glorious creators, the kingdom of Koshé attacked the Mother Earth Midgard. From here, terrible wars were unleashed. An era suddenly came. Destruction, confusion, deception. The creators deliberately confused everything in order to come and again open everyone's eyes to how the world is truly arranged, and even more than before, to light up their garden here on Earth, connecting the worlds and again giving birth to wizards, who are the descendants and the creators of the glorious ancestors. We are playing here. The whole world is a game for us, moments of creativity and creation. We're also expanding in the moment here and now, so we want to tell only fairy tales. After all, we are wizards. We definitely believe in the glory of our great glory, wisdom, love, born by our ancestors. And what we create is the path of the soul to explore all of the secrets. The new era has come. It is time for the storytellers to wake up, to cleanse themselves of other delusions and once again play according to the will of true love. The power of Veles will come. In the glory of the ancestors, that is ourselves. The new era will begin, where there's only one meaning, to know and remember oneself. And then this is the diversity and the manifestation of the sacred light, to create according to conscience and truth. In our creativity, we carry the knowledge and the power of the glorious ancestors. In the universe, there are energies and forces, matter and primordial matter. We are that universe, and our power is the word, and our word is the testament of God. Karuna is an ancient language, the progenitor of all languages. Even modern linguistics claim it was this language that became the basis for the emergence of other languages. As the family of gods, progenitors became the basis for the emergence of all living things on earth. Possessing Karuna and remembering it, reading it or singing it, even listening to it or looking at it, you will feel the activation of your soul. They are filled with light. The crystal lattice of your body is aligned since the vibrations of karuna are comparable to the vibration of the universe itself, and it is healing. It also promotes deep immersion in yourself, activation of the molecules of what makes your body, your consciousness, and your path to enlightenment. Our ancestors created spaces and worlds around themselves through the universe with the help of karuna, and many storytellers, also known as alchemists, use the power of those words in their spells. It's no wonder after reading or listening to the Veles mantra, the fairy tale will wake up. Cooling of data centers. From Private Equity Hub, or as it's known on its website, PE Hub, we have the following. The site has been covering quite a bit about data center related investments by private equity outfits. Their latest area of focus has been investments in firms who provide cooling technology for data centers. Just a little color for you folks who have probably never truly been inside one of these things. The facilities are often slightly underground or a full story underground. Even if you're looking at the building, it appears to be on ground level. The reason is to take advantage of the natural cooling effect of being below ground. Item 2 is they have a raised floor environment where the servers or the gear sits on top of that floor, who's raised up, with a large space below. The space below has special air circulating gear moving cooled air under the equipment as well as on the raised surface. I've mentioned on other programs the gear in those centers produces an immense amount of heat. If you're running the really sexy equipment, including artificial intelligence, the newer systems use liquid cooling, who runs along the outer surfaces of the gear or actually runs through the equipment itself. If through the equipment, the fluid is of a special kind who doesn't damage the circuit boards and related. This is a bit funny, as that approach began in the 1990s with desktop computers used by people playing high-end video games. They developed their own home cooling system to keep chips from overheating and was picked up by industry later. As I've shared on other programs, between the chips, the memory, and artificial intelligence, the needs of data centers are now going through the ceiling, including their power needs. So this also requires radical new approaches to cool the equipment. This might be an area where you may want to investigate your investment options for yourself. Rothchild and Epstein connection. Because much like Maui, you forgot about Maui again, didn't you? We have to add wood to the fire, that is Jeff Epstein. On a blog called Hot Star, we have the following concerning Lynn Forrester de Rothschild, yes, of the Rothschild family, and her relationship with Jeff Epstein. The author calls out 9 items beyond a ton of detail that's in this write-up. The first item, Lynn Rothschild's brother Ken owned and operated the private terminal at Teterboro in New Jersey under the name Million Air. This was the terminal Epstein used to fly out of when he was coming into or out of the U.S. when he wasn't in Florida. That airport was used for trafficking women and girls, and it's listed in Epstein's Black Book. Second, one of her letters to Bill Clinton about Epstein has gone into the public domain. Third, 1997 and 1998, she was on 5 trips with Epstein on his private jet. Fourth, in 2000, she sold a Manhattan townhouse to Jeff Epstein for $8.5 million less than it was worth. Ghislaine Maxwell moved immediately into that townhouse and lived there until 2015. Recall also from prior programs the immense amount of audiovisual equipment in all of Epstein's properties. Fifth, there's a strong argument to be made she introduced Epstein to Alan Dershowitz, Nathan Meyervold, Prince Andrew, and Bill Clinton. Sixth, Lynn Rothschild began her professional career at a law firm in D.C. who was associated with the district attorney who attempted to downgrade Epstein's sex offender status in 2011. Seventh, in 2013, she was an advisor on the board at Deutsche Bank, who at the time was trying to expand its clientele. A month later, after her appointment, Deutsche Bank acquired Epstein as a client. This is also notable because of that woman judge here in the United States who was hearing a case about Deutsche Bank many years later. I'm sure many of you remember that one, the whole thing where the package delivery driver, straight out of a spy movie, showed up to her front door looking for her. And instead, the result was her son was killed and her husband was wounded, and they never found the shooter. Eighth, 2015 release of flight logs removed 5 pages who were sealed by court order, and it's believed they contain further information about her flights on Epstein's jet. Ninth, her husband, Evelyn de Rothschild, was listed in Epstein's Black Book, but she never was. Trucking and emissions. Noting my comment recently about California's soon-to-pass state measure banning diesel locomotives, we have another related item. The U.S. EPA has targets for diesel emissions for 2027 who have several issues associated with those targets. One of the solutions to achieving those targets include the often discussed topic of electric trucks, especially the large Class 8 trailer tractor vehicles. I covered on prior programs the immense engineering problems associated with those vehicles. The trucking industry has finally had enough, and at the Advanced Clean Transportation Expo in Las Vegas last May, two significant trucking firms' executives spoke out against these measures, those being J.B. Hunt and Ryder Systems. The president of J.B. Hunt, Shelley Simpson, gave a speech at the expo where she stated that they had studied the electric truck option and it just simply isn't feasible. EV trucks are too expensive at the point of purchase, even if purchased in bulk. The cost offsets any perceived or real benefit from using them. Further, the trucks are uncompetitive and inefficient compared to vehicles they're supposed to replace. She stated from her own experience, the overall cost of electric vehicles worked out to 3 times what a diesel truck will cost. Then the vehicles carry less because, say it with me, they weigh so much more because of all the battery weight. How much of a weight penalty? How does 4,000 to 12,000 pounds sound to you? Plus, remember that adds to the wear and tear on the tires. Ryder Trucking also pointed out their data reflecting many magnitudes higher costs than were anticipated. Because both company leaders are at the mercy of outfits like BlackRock, they tempered their statements about how they want to continue to study the matter. Ryder provided some fascinating figures for consideration. The average annual cost to operate a Class 8 tractor-trailer truck in the U.S. is around $291,000 a year. They used Georgia as their test example. In California, that cost is $334,000 a year. If you were to switch to a Class 8 electric vehicle or electric truck, your national cost rises to $622,000, and in California, $648,000 a year. That's before you factor in that whole electric locomotive thing California has planned. They also covered at that conference the complete lack of national infrastructure to charge those trucks. The data for my comments on this topic come from Power Progress magazine. Last item, Japan and the Philippines. You'll continue to see things like the following continue, including Japan and Korea going on mutual naval maneuvers. Japan and the Philippines held their first joint naval exercises recently in the lovely vacation destination of the South China Sea. Both countries have also recently authorized the stationing of troops in one another's countries. I'm sure folks in Manila would still be a little touchy seeing Japanese troops strolling around their capital again circa 1941. Not to get too excited, it was a single warship from Japan and a single warship from the Philippines. I don't believe anyone wanted to send a flotilla that close to China's borders. Maneuvers like this will no doubt continue. V, I yield the floor, sir.
No, excellent program, man. Excellent program. Hold on one sec. Yeah, you covered a lot of ground, and folks, again, go back and listen to this. A lot of key things. It's going to be a hell of some weeks that are ahead. Between now and election, fellas. I think we're gonna see the craziest things ever.
Yeah, and it's been said by many folks, and I know, you hear me say it often, but even I have to write little post-it notes to myself to remind myself of the things I have to remind myself. We knew this fall would be crazy. I'm not going to say good or bad. It just is. But if the DNC convention is any indication, I mean, what kills me is some of the universities I'm working with, I've been showing them some of these activist websites I've been monitoring.
Yeah.
And a number of them flat out said, make 2024 1968. Referring
yes,
to,
I've seen that.
Yeah, referring to what happened in 1968. Strangely enough, as I'm figuratively speaking, as I sit here with a cigarette, flicking it out the window, because if I recall correctly, 1968 was also in Chicago. It was another Democrat National Convention that was disrupted.
For the layperson, could you tell us, for the layperson, what that 1968 inference means?
Yes, because it's a biggie.
It's a huge one.
Yes. Lyndon Baines Johnson, LBJ, spawn of Satan that he was, had stated he would his famous words, "I will neither seek nor accept the Democratic nomination for president. And so it opened up that election to a whole bunch of different players in American politics to try and fill that vacuum. And in spite of the Vietnam War and the reasoning that LBJ gave for why he wasn't going to run for office, people at the time were still shocked. I mean, it's kind of like Ronald Reagan after the Iran-Contra thing came out. Everybody thought, oh, Reagan's toast. And it's like, not necessarily. But LBJ stepped down, which is kind of interesting because there's people who never accepted that. And I don't mean that in a negative way. I just mean that their view was, this is American politics. I mean, there's times that even the Italians look at us and go, wow, that's pretty bad as far as our political system goes. So for LBJ, who, by the way, had survived Texas politics for years, to suddenly step down, there are those scholars who in today's world, folks, will say, well, what really are the correlations between Nixon and LBJ? Because both of them were forced to leave office, which begs the question who and why, and the usual questions from the movie JFK. But when LBJ stepped down or said, I'm not seeking re-election, the elephant in the room, the thing that is right in front of our faces right now while I'm saying this, is parallels. And I don't want to go too far into this, but consider what I said about the world's elites and their belief systems. 1968, 1967, you have a sitting U.S. president who could seek the election, may not win it, but he could seek to be his party's candidate. He instead steps down, finishes out his presidency. Well, that's what we're dealing with right now with Joe Biden. And so where does the Democratic Party have its convention? Chicago in 1968, Chicago in 2024. Well, even for me, it's like, oh, wait a minute. What? But the other part of what happened was there were massive protests at the 68 convention for the Democrat Party. There was a lot of violence, but say it with me. There were a whole bunch of protest groups who stood up very quickly and just raised hell in Chicago and caused all sorts of problems. And what came out in the mid-1970s during the Admiral Stansfield Turner hearings and years later, I mean, you can find it in the public domain, even though the media never brings it up, which is the entire protest activity at the Democratic National Convention in 1968 was entirely led and orchestrated by the FBI to enable Nixon to win. And of course, what happened to Nixon? Well, we know what happened to Nixon, and as we've covered here on Rogue, there's a number of very excellent books that have come out the last few years, who all have their differing narratives. I'll be very clear about that. But as I'm fond of saying, they all contain all new data. And as I often say, when it comes to the the Kennedy assassination, you can't quite understand it until you go back to Cecil Rhodes, which that's a pot of coffee. That's a pot of coffee to get yourself through that one.
Yeah, it is.
But as I look at my bookshelf, I've got 15 or so books on Kennedy or Kennedy-related topics, and quite a few of them all have radically different narratives. In fact, some of them are no harm, no foul to the author. I've never published, but in my opinion, they're just flat out wrong. But it doesn't matter, because even as a frustrated amateur scholar, even wrong books can contain information that's valuable. Even if and it's like a professor telling students who are dealing with a lot of theoretical topic matter, whether it's math or whether it's international affairs or whether it's business. Your data can be your conclusions can be completely wrong, but your data's right. You've just got to understand what you did wrong with the data and then go back and do it again. I myself have been in front of professors who politically we were as diametrically opposed as possible, but constantly, God love them, encouraged me 5-6 times, kept beating me over the head saying, do it again, do it again, do it again, fellas. And then eventually I would be able to step back and say, oh, holy crap. Okay, now I get it. And so you look at the Kennedy assassination, there's mountains of new data that's come out. And with Nixon, There's mountains of new data that's come out. I think the more interesting question that for some graduate student or even undergraduate student who wants to go down that road would be a comparison and contrasting of LBJ and Nixon. Not politically, but the factors that forced both of them out of office. Because I'm just of the opinion the people or groups involved are probably very similar, if not downright the same. And so here, in my opinion, is a petri dish called the DNC convention, where if data sources are correct, many of the attendees are under assumed names. Now, let's take a step back, folks. Most major gatherings of even corporate executives, much less politicians, are under assumed names. I mean, that's as old as time. So let me be fair there. But that said, I am quite serious when I tell all of you that I am monitoring this with a micrometer as far as what's going on in Chicago today, tomorrow, and this week. Not just, does Hillary ride in on a white horse, but I'm looking for tradecraft. I'm looking for planning. I'm looking for who the groups are that are involved. Because I'm telling you right now, if you look, I promise you this, if you look at our universities, and I've already raised this on another show, when states like Wisconsin, California, and Indiana are all taking the same measures to try and clamp things down a month or two before the students come back, you gotta know that we all know what the hell's going to go down. And so, because I've seen firsthand how fast they can move those little U-Hauls near a college campus, and hut, they'll go out there with their, but I mean, it's why I included in today's program the segment about crisis actors. Because what were the real numbers on students arrested or detained, or terribly sorry, protesters detained at the, and as I've shared with you, the terminology they use is encampment. We would just call it a permanent protest site where folks don't leave. They just stay there with their tents. But these encampments at all these schools, much less these encampments that have already been set up in Chicago. What's my personal favorite? We've got Antifa and BLM. Logistics, folks, logistics. You got to feed those people. You got to get them in. You got to get them out. You got to organize them. Again, this isn't a job for a project manager. This is a job for a program manager. In fact, I'll go there. This is a job for somebody and somebodies who have military-like logistics training, because you've got a major city and all these other considerations. Because I'm telling you right now, I've got some folks that are dealing with the World Cup in the next couple of years, and they're looking at things from the perspective of each individual major university or site where those soccer games are being held collectively, because they'll have similar but yet different challenges at each location. Well, the same is for many universities across the United States. And yes, Gilbert Nowak, you're correct. Wisconsin University is a public university, so are the UC system schools out in California. Indiana, I believe, is private. But private and public schools both, they have their challenges in trying to deal with this. And if this is how much money and logistics and resources are being thrown at a single city in the United States, it'll get hairy. Now, one of two or three things will happen. Will the protesters be blocked from getting to campus, and will it take some of the air out of their activities? That's a distinct possibility. In fact, even California is ready to, and Wisconsin for that matter, are ready to stand up to them and say, you're not coming on campus. I think there's a school out there, I forget who it was, just passed a resolution saying, if you didn't schedule a protest 6 months in advance, you're not here. We'll have you arrested. The other is law enforcement or similar resources go in to stop these encampments before they begin, and we get flat out 1960s like violence. Now, part of me is sitting here like Matthew McConaughey going, ooh, that would be something to see. I don't want our law enforcement people getting hurt, but how far will they go? I saw the protest movement stand down at the end of the school year for a number of reasons, but we got a whole new school year starting. We got a whole bunch of schools out there, and there's a lot of money that's been paid. And again, we've got it's very obvious, folks. You have big pallets of bricks in a blue state like Illinois, in a city like Chicago, being set up right before the protests begin. Big pallets of bricks. Now, the last I checked, I'm pretty damn sure the Treasury Department and the FBI and a couple of three-lettered agencies that you could probably ask them quietly to give you a hand, I'm pretty damn sure you could track where the money and the logistics for that came from. But yet, What's happening behind the scenes, we don't know. But above board, there just doesn't seem to be any, in the old days, I'd expect law enforcement to step up and say, hey, we're investigating that. We just want you to know we're going to find out who's putting these bricks here. But it's like, the media says the words. We've got all these bricks showing up. Really? Anybody take down a license plate number? I'm just asking. But anyway, V, your thoughts?
No, man, you covered a lot of ground. Great stuff, folks. Thank you all for listening in, and we'll be back. And let me know if you want to keep doing this on Monday. It works great for me as well.
Yeah, I will let you know. And C. Garrison, to your question about the University of California, no, they are not on strike with the UAW because a judge interceded and told the UAW basically, this is an illegal action. So for now, that has stood down. But yeah, it'll be interesting. So stay tuned, folks, the rest of the week. V, who else we got coming the rest of the week?
We're trying to get Harley back.
Gotcha.
So, yeah.
Yes, we have to.
All right, folks.
Have a good one.
Take care. Cheers.